Welcome to the Lily Pad Podcast. My name is April, and I'm your host. And today, we're going to be talking about something very specific. And we're going to dive into the realm of estate planning and elder law. And I am no expert, but I am sitting with an expert in this realm. I'm sitting here with Jason Ebacher out of Amesbury, Massachusetts. You are an estate planning and elder law attorney. Actually,
Correct.
I think it's a better term. Now, you, from what I've read from your website, you serve Massachusetts and New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay, and how long have you been practicing? I saw it's been quite a while.
Yeah, so I've been an attorney now for 15 years,
Okay.
and I'm licensed both in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. In my practice, I just strictly do estate planning and elder law,
Yeah.
and I do some probate as well.
Probate. Oh, excellent. Probate, that's always good too.
Yeah.
So when we met, was it last year, actually?
Yes.
You were referred to us by my mom's financial person, and one of the things I find, now I'm speaking for personal experience. When I was younger, I never thought estate planning, elder law. You don't think of it.
No.
And maybe even people at my age, and I won't say it too loud, I'm almost 50. But
I'm 49, so.
Are you?
Yes.
oh, see, I thought you were a lot younger than me.
No.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I can't believe I'm going to be a half a century in less than a year. But you don't always think about certain things when
Right.
you're growing up. And so I live with my mom right now, and that's kind of why we reached out to you, because we wanted to get our house in order, all our ducks in a row. And it was a good thing we did because, and not to get into a lot of details, but when a family finds an attorney or a person to handle this particular area of their life, documentation and all of the steps are crucial, because when you mentioned to us when you were doing some of your research, we thought our house was in a trust.
Correct.
And it actually wasn't.
It wasn't, no.
And that's kind of really what triggered me to want to do this podcast, because we had no idea. It was years. We thought that this was all set. We didn't have to worry about anything. And then we decided to just do some updating.
Correct.
Thankfully.
Yep.
And you found out that I think it was like the final step hadn't been done. I think everything was done up to, it was the filing of the trust, I think it was.
Right.
Which is huge.
It was placing the property into the trust.
Okay.
And in the past, I've seen this often, and it's all depending on the attorney.
Mm-hmm.
There are some attorneys that will draft your will and your trust,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll draft this terrific trust, but yet they won't put anything in it, which completely defeats the whole purpose of doing
Right.
the trust. And so I've noticed that a few times. My father had that same situation where he said to me, "Oh yeah, the house is in a trust," and I looked, because you can go right online to the Registry of Deeds website.
Correct, yes.
And I said, "Dad, no, it's not." So
That's scary.
Yeah, so
Very scary.
that same situation was in your family.
Right, and we had, like I said, we had no idea. And I want to say it was at least probably a solid decade we thought the house was all set up. So when we met you, and I have to say I was very impressed, because you were super thorough. Like, you went over everything with us. We had our Zoom meetings. You were very, what I liked about what you did too is you explained things to us. And you
Right.
put up with all of my Post-its and all of my notes, because I'll tell you, when I printed out the documents, which was a lot of
Yes.
pages, we read those pages, and I don't know how many Post-its I put. Let's ask him about this.
That was a long meeting.
It was. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
But it is important, and like I said, when you're younger, and even our age now, you don't always think about these things. And a lot of us have parents that are still alive that maybe
Right.
still own their homes or condos or property.
I didn't think about this stuff until, aside from being an attorney, I didn't think about this stuff until I had kids and realized that, I'm an adult now, and I have to do adult things.
I don't like adulting.
Yeah,
I don't like doing that.
Yeah. So I didn't start thinking about that until my early 30s.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things where if you're not careful, when, things start to happen, you could be in trouble if you're not.
Right. The negative part of that is that I've have clients of mine I have one individual, she's 90, and very wealthy, never did anything.
Oh,
And of course, the problem is now is that, she needed a power of attorney.
Yeah.
Because while you're alive, your most important documents is your power of attorney and your healthcare proxy. Those are your incapacity documents.
Right.
And
Those are big.
her husband, of course, had passed many years ago. So her daughter needed to act as her power of attorney because she was incapacitated. Problem is that she didn't have a power of attorney in place, so her daughter had to retain me to apply to be her conservator.
Wow.
So we had to do a conservatorship with the probate court, and it is a very long, expensive process where it easily could have been avoided by just having a simple power of attorney in place.
Yes, and that's what we did.
Right.
So we have, and like I said, now my mom and I and my brother, we feel so comfortable knowing that everything's in place.
Right.
And we have you for any information and whatnot. And like I said, that's really why that one little thing that we found out, and I said this would be a good podcast topic because a lot of people don't realize what slips through the cracks, and it can be very dangerous.
Right. Exactly. That situation like that, where it's not the first time I've seen that, but even just having simple documents in place, how it's going to avoid so many problems down the road.
Absolutely.
Like I said, having a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy, and a lot of people don't have those documents in place. And if you don't have a spouse and they're not competent to make their decisions, then you're going to have to go to court. And the probate process, whether it's for incapacity documents like conservatorships and guardianships, or after you pass away, it's all paperwork, but it's painful.
And it's long.
And it's long, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
And especially with COVID, where
it makes it even
the
harder.
probate courts is even more overworked because a lot of them are still working from home. So it's
Right.
just a long process.
And I bet it's even longer because of COVID, because
Right.
everything is backed up. I mean,
Yes.
everything's behind.
Absolutely.
Everything is
Absolutely.
behind.
That's why I always say avoid probate as much as you can,
Yeah.
because it's a lot of work, and it's a lot. You can avoid a lot of that by having the right paperwork in place.
That's why I feel so much better knowing that we have all of our ducks in a row. And I went onto your website because I wanted to make sure I had some good questions for you.
Sure.
Although I think we almost summed everything up in that 10 minutes, but we're gonna.
Sure.
So basically, one of the things I was curious about, and this was what I didn't. I mean, I think I had understood it, but not as well as I thought. You know, the benefits of a revocable trust and a will, but I didn't really understand the concept of revocable versus irrevocable, because I think the trust we thought the house was in was irrevocable.
Revocable.
Oh, it was revocable.
Right. So you had a revocable trust. You thought it was in it, but it wasn't.
Right.
So most common trust documents that I work with in my practice, revocable and irrevocable trusts. Revocable trust, in my opinion, anybody over the age of 18 should have a trust in place.
Okay.
The days of just the wealthy having a trust are over. Trusts are a great tool where, as I say to my clients, you're still control from the grave. You're still controlling your assets, so you can control of when people get their inheritance, how often they get the inheritance, and when that can be withheld. Whereas in a simple will, if the person's over the age of 18, they get it outright.
And they just do whatever they want.
They can do whatever you want.
And that's
So-
very dangerous in a lot of.
Especially with couples with young kids at home. Like, for example, that's what the light bulb went off with me when I had kids and realized that, my goodness, if I was something to happen to me and their mother, then, they're going to inherit hundreds of thousands of dollars at the age of 18. And I think back at the age of 18, what trouble I could have gotten into.
Me too. I could still get in trouble, and I'm almost 50.
Right.
But I know what you're saying. Kids don't. Their thought process is very different than even when they're in their late 20s.
Right.
Perspectives are.
That's why I say my younger clients, their most important documents, one is their will, because you have a guardianship nomination within the will. It basically says who's going to raise your kids if, God forbid, something happens to you. Now, of course, as an estate planning attorney, I unfortunately have to be Mr. Gloom and Doom and plan for every possible what if.
Right. But you need that, and that's people need that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, even though you might not be the family that has somebody with a substance abuse issue or a mental illness, you never know, it could happen at any time, unfortunately.
Oh, exactly.
So, going back to my younger clients, like I said, their most important document is their will because of the guardianship nomination, because if you don't have that in place, so guess who decides who's going to raise your kids? The state.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want that.
And then, of course, the
trust.
trust kicks in is that, God forbid something happens to you, both parents, their estate is going to go pour into the trust, and therefore you're still controlling those assets from the grave. So most common clause is a 25-30 clause that in a lot of my clients' documents, where at age 25, the kids can get 50% of their inheritance, and age 30 can get the other 50%. Now, mind you, they can access their inheritance prior to age 25. We call it a HEMS standard, Health, Education, Maintenance, and Support. So, so just speaking locally here in Amesbury, say if you wanted one of your kids to go to Governors in Byfield, the prep school, they can access their they can access their inheritance prior to that for that, but not for like going out and buy a new Corvette or something.
Right. So it's like it's
something sensible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the great thing about a trust.
A Corvette's not sensible?
No. Sorry.
No. Oh, okay.
No.
I'll cross that off my list.
Yeah. And so that's the great thing about the trust. So that's the revocable trust. Now, the only thing a revocable trust is going to do for you in regards to after you pass away, it's going to avoid probate. So any assets that are in the trust, that's what we talked about in your situation, is that you had this beautiful trust that was drafted by an attorney, but there was nothing in it. So what's the whole point? That's why
it's not funny, but it's like, think back when you told us that, we were like, what?
Well, that's
what are you talking about?
Well, that's why, in my practice, I do the initial funding of the trust because I've seen trusts being drafted, these great trusts that other attorneys have drafted, but they didn't put anything in it. In the past, I know that I've attorneys, they would draft, not all attorneys like this, but I've heard of some of them, older attorneys, that they would draft this trust and then say, okay, now go put stuff in it. And of course, the client looks at them like they have 10 heads, like, how do I do that?
Right.
So I do the initial funding and usually it's the primary residence. And that's how the funding is basically you just draft a deed and a trustee certificate, do a new homestead, and you file that with the registry of deeds.
Right.
And once they stamp it at the registry of deeds, then that property is now owned by the trust. So that's when I say funding, that's what that means.
Okay.
So, so with a revocable trust, anything that's in that trust will avoid probate, which is key because you want to avoid probate as much as you can.
Right.
The irrevocable trust, that's a common document I do with my older clients. Now, with my practice, I just do estate planning and elder law. Like I said, I will do some probate. If it's a current client of mine, I'll do it. With the irrevocable trust, it's a very common document. Like I said, for my older clients, I think I just said that. Yeah. And that's for long-term care planning. Now, the elder law portion of my practice essentially is long-term care planning. I call it estate planning on steroids.
That sounds about right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's basically enhancing, if you do have a plan in place, enhancing what you have. If you don't have a plan, then obviously creating a whole new plan, creating a new one. But the irrevocable trust, what that does is it avoids long-term care issues. For example, if you have to go to a nursing home, now I know that I've never had a client come to my office and say, I can't wait to be in the nursing home. Okay, never had that. No. And every client that comes in here, when we have this conversation, they say to me, you know what, Jason, no way, I'll never go to a nursing home. Do this, that, the other, but never do that. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Where your loved ones can't care for you anymore, or if there's nobody there to care for you anymore, sometimes you don't have a choice.
Right. So
then the question becomes up is, how are you going to pay for that?
Exactly.
Okay. There's only two ways.
Because it's not cheap.
No.
By any means, it's so expensive.
Average cost in Massachusetts is roughly around $13,000 a month.
Oh, my God.
I was at a conference in Denver a few years back, right before COVID, for elder law attorneys. It's called, it's a national group I'm part of called Elder Council. And I was the only Massachusetts attorney in there. And
really the only one?
Only one.
Out of the whole market.
Yeah, and there was 50 attorneys all from around the country. And, of course, the presenter said, all right, they went around the room and say, what's the average cost of a nursing home in your state? And, of course, somebody from Wyoming raises their hands, $5,000. And Nebraska, $6,000. And, of course, as you got east, it was going up and up and up. In Massachusetts, the third highest the country, we're right there neck and neck with New York and Connecticut.
I was going to ask you who the other two.
But the two,
Connecticut.
New York and Connecticut, right up there, the same.
Interesting.
But Hawaii and Alaska. Oh. I didn't know that either. But Hawaii and Alaska are 1 and 2, right? As far as how long-term care costs, I find that very odd. But
see, I'd love to land in Hawaii one day. I'm not going there.
So would I.
Hence the tropical shirt that I'm wearing today.
Very nice.
I'm thinking tropics.
That's right.
But
That's right.
Oh, wow.
So what the irrevocable trust does is that you create this trust, you put an asset in the trust, and then there's a clock. There's a 5-year clock that the federal government has where that clock starts ticking. And after 5 years, that asset is out of your name. So the key is that, and usually it's the primary residence for the seniors, put that in the trust. Yeah. Now they don't own the property anymore. They can still live there. They still pay the taxes, they pay the utilities, but they're not considered the owners of the property. And what happens is that they have to pick somebody else to be the trustee of the trust. That's the difference between the revocable and the irrevocable, whereas you can be the trustee of your own trust for a revocable trust, but for irrevocable trust, for long-term care planning, you can't be the trustee. Because when somebody applies for Medicaid, the Medicaid office is going to go through that trust with a fine-tooth comb.
Correct.
And if you have any control at all over the principal of that trust, then you're not going to qualify for Medicaid. For that particular asset. So that particular asset in the trust may disqualify you from getting Medicaid.
So that's why the irrevocable is, for the long term, is different. Because that's what we have.
Right.
We have the irrevocable.
Correct.
Myself and my brother.
That's right. That's right. Because the key is you want to get that clock ticking as fast as you can. Now, mind you, it might not be a concern of some people because, I usually have, obviously every client is different. I have some clients that come in here and say, you know what, I'm going to spend every dime that I have, and I'm going to live it up and enjoy my life. And I'm all for that. That's great.
Yeah, especially if you have a lot of dimes.
Right. But then I have the other clients who will say, you know what, I'd rather live in a cardboard box the rest of my life so that I can leave Junior some money. In that case there, that's where, if that's their desire, then they want to preserve. They got to preserve some of their assets if they do indeed want to leave an inheritance, because if they don't do that pre-planning and they go to long-term care, then all of their assets are going to be eaten up, and they'll have nothing to leave to the next generation. And that's the whole point of the irrevocable trust, is that parents that want to leave something to the next generation.
Right. And that's a good thing, though, because, and like you said, you always want to take care of your loved ones.
Of course.
We always do. And we my brother and I always wanted to make sure Mom was in a good place and taken care of, and we don't have to worry about it. And after meeting you and getting all of those ducks in a row, we actually feel so much better. We don't have to think about it anymore.
Right.
We have everything filed, and we have an endless amount of information we have from you if we ever want to call you. Fortunately, we don't bother you too often.
No, it's I always enjoy the calls from the Maggios.
Oh, she wanted me to ask you if you like the cookies.
They were wonderful, thank you.
Because we're Italian and we always cook.
Yes.
I've actually mastered candy these days.
Nice.
Well, that's a whole other episode. So another thing you had mentioned was the incapacity planning, and we kind of went over that a little bit with the power of attorney and the healthcare proxy. One of the other areas of your website I found was the special needs planning, which, you're planning for people that are either disabled or have like a mental or physical handicap. Do you have a lot of clients like that? Is it more complex than, say, your standard paperwork, or is it just additional documentation?
It's additional documentation. So I'm just thinking of a recent client that I had where she has a daughter that has special needs. Her daughter is in her 40s.
Okay.
And she was concerned about leaving her daughter a big inheritance when she passes, because that's the worst thing you want to do when you have somebody that's getting government benefits. If you have somebody that can't work and they're getting government benefits, whether they're on Medicaid or they're getting SSI, the last thing you want to do is leave them a big inheritance, because it's going to knock them off that government benefits.
Right.
So So the alternative you can do is create what's called a special needs trust. Now there's a third party, there's a first party special needs trust. I won't get into that because they'll completely confuse you and the audience. But the special needs trust is intended so instead of the inheritance, the mom's inheritance going directly to the daughter when she passes away, it goes into the special needs trust. Okay. Where somebody is picked to be the trustee of that trust and manage that trust property for her daughter. Now, the money or the assets that are in that trust can be used to supplement whatever the government's not giving her. Not to supplant, but to supplement. So, for example, say she wants to go on a vacation or she needs a new TV. Because most of the time the government benefit she's getting is going to be for lodging and going to be for food. So you don't want to, take the place of that, because the government will say, hey, you clearly don't need that anymore.
Right.
So that's what the whole point of a special needs trust is, to still have access to that, but also not getting you kicked off the government benefits.
And that's nice because, like you said, with people with special needs, it's another form of protection for them because, like you said, they have the government assistance, and if they are, if it's a severe handicap, they have someone making sure they're always taken care of if it's not from their government assistance, but it's from the inheritance.
Correct.
And it's always important, obviously, to have somebody who you can trust taking care of that trust.
Yes.
Because you want somebody honorable to make sure that the special needs person that's involved with this is not taken advantage of.
Right.
Either.
That's why I always say to clients, your trustee doesn't have to be a loved one, doesn't have to be a friend. It's just simply somebody you trust that knows it's going to follow your wishes to the letter of the law.
Right.
If you can't make your decisions on your own. So it doesn't have, like I said, it doesn't have to be a loved one or a friend.
Have you ever run into a situation where the trustee that someone picked turned out to maybe not be so honorable? I'm just, curious if that's ever really... I mean, I'm sure it's happened.
It happens. It happens. I haven't seen it very much.
Oh, that's good.
But it does happen, unfortunately. Nothing's perfect, but I haven't seen it very often.
No, that's good. I would hate to know that it happens more often than not. I mean, that's very scary.
I mean, I've had situations where now the trustee that they picked is now incapacitated themselves.
Oh, what do you do in a situation?
So that's why I always recommend you name a backup in place.
Okay.
So always have a backup in place just in case. If that primary person you've elected either predeceases you or becomes incapacitated, or they just simply don't want to do it.
Oh, that's... Oh, okay. Yeah, sometimes they just change their mind.
Right.
So it's like a plan B.
Because this is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It definitely is a lot of work, and it's you're helping taking care of a person technically.
Correct.
So it's a very big responsibility.
Yeah, it's time consuming and it's a lot of work, and sometimes people say, I just can't do it. I get too much on my plate.
Yeah.
That's why I always recommend you name a backup.
Mm-hmm. I think we did. Pretty positive we did. Now I have to think about it. I'm like, did we name a backup?
Yes.
We did.
Yeah.
See, you know your clients, right?
Yeah. You did.
Oh, good. I don't even know what we did. That's why you're here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the elder law realm, if that is all right.
Of course.
So we'll do that, and we'll be right back in, say, like about 5 minutes. Welcome back to the Lily Pad Podcast. My name is April, and if you're just joining us, I'm sitting here with Jason. I just said you wrong. Jason Ebacher out of Amesbury, Massachusetts. You are an estate planning and elder law attorney, and you are fantastic at what you do because we have personal experience with what you do. And we're going to dive into some of the elder law realm of what you do. And I noticed that there were a few things listed on your website: crisis planning, pre-planning, and the Medicaid long-term care planning. Now, I know we kind of touched base on some of that already.
Yes.
The crisis planning kind of, I think, is almost self-explanatory, but kind of like the unexpected situation, I'm thinking, right? Or
crisis planning is essentially, mom and dad are now in a nursing home, and they are draining all of their assets and everything they've worked so hard for in their life. And so they usually, if they come to an elder law attorney, and there are certain strategies that you can do to try to preserve some of those assets while not have them actually disqualifying them from getting any government benefits when they run out of money. Because right now, if it's for a single individual, and that's usually the case, you can only have $2,000 in assets to be able to qualify for Medicaid. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. So usually the crisis planning situation is a mom or dad or just a single individual is in the nursing home. They're draining all of their assets, running out of money, and they don't want to lose everything. So what can we do? And that's where usually I get the call, and we can sit down, and there are certain strategies that we can do. But of course, crisis planning is not the preferable way.
Right. You don't want to wait till the last minute.
No, the proactive planning, which I do with most of my clients, that's the way that I would rather go, the way that I'm sure they would rather go as well in regards to their estate process. The proactive planning is somewhat similar situation to yours, where you come in and you put together a most common and irrevocable trust and try to preserve some of those assets so that when it comes time, if you are ever going to need to qualify for Medicaid, you can try to preserve some of your assets while still getting those government benefits.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine what it would be like in the panic state that some people might find themselves in a situation like that, because
Well, the example I used earlier in the And this was, talking about my client that's 90 years old. She's in assisted living. And, crisis planning doesn't have to be just trust. It could be just simple as somebody needs a power of attorney, before they're considered incapacitated. Unfortunately, in her case, she was considered incapacitated, so I was retained to petition the probate court to conserve her, to get a conservatorship for her daughter.
Yep.
And that's all falls under the crisis planning situation.
Right, and the power of attorney, because now that's what I am, and I am also the healthcare proxy. A lot of people don't realize that those are very big roles.
Yes.
Very big roles. And again, when I was younger, never in a million years thought I'd have those particular terms associated with myself.
Correct.
But, it's nice to know that no matter what, Mom has myself and my brother. Because, even though I have those titles, and I like to stress, too, because people that get that assigned to them, especially if it's like a sibling situation, I don't really have more power than him, because decisions would never be made without both of us, talking about any, next step or whatnot. But it is nice to know that, because she always took care of us.
Right.
And I think about that, and we want to take care of her. And so I'm glad that we have that all in place. And if you are ever elected a power of attorney or a healthcare proxy, it's a big responsibility, but I find it kind of an honor that I was considered for that.
It is.
I guess.
Yeah, a lot of people find it to be an honor. I know. I look at it differently now, because I know it's a lot of work.
It is a lot. It is.
So a lot of times I'll get clients that come in, and I just think one of my first clients, probably over a decade ago, I remember we were sitting down, and her name was Mary. That wasn't her name, but we'll say her name's Mary in this case.
That works.
And I remember Mary sitting down with me and I said, all right, Mary, who do you want to name as your power of attorney? Well, I think I'm going to name John. He's good with money, and I'll name my daughter Janice as the backup. Okay, no problem. Who do you want to name as your healthcare proxy? And she pauses, and she says, well, I have to name Janice. And I said, okay, fine. But let me ask you, why do you feel like you have to name Janice? Well, if I don't, she's going to be upset. And I said, Mary, let me ask you this. If a medical decision needs to be made on your behalf, and of course the ultimate medical decision would be if you're on life support and somebody needs to make a decision to take you off life support, is Janice going to be able to make that decision? Oh, no. She'll keep me alive forever. So for some of our older listeners here, they'll remember Ted Williams, the baseball player, where I believe his kids froze his head because they wanted to, just in case he could ever come back, so they wanted to keep him alive forever. And she's like, oh no, Janice she'd have me frozen somewhere, keep me alive forever. Head. Yeah, next to his head. Yep.
I'm not laughing at all.
No. And so I said, okay. I said, well, as your attorney, I just advise you. I can't tell you what to do. I just advise you. I said, well, let me ask you this. Would John be able to make that decision? She said, oh yeah, John, he's cold as a cucumber. Whatever Mom wants, Mom gets. And I said, well, as your attorney, like I said, I'm here to advise you. I would recommend you name John instead of Janice, because he seems he's more competent to make that decision.
Right.
Yeah. But I get that a lot with parents. Like, they feel like they have to name somebody because they feel like they're gonna disrespect one of the kids or make them upset. Where it's not. I get the feeling, like you mentioned, it's a badge of honor. Like my mom chose me to do this, but I'm on the other side of it where I see all the work, and
it's like, can you actually?
And I'm
do
like,
it?
It's not exactly. It's they're not doing you a big favor. Put it that way, because it is a lot of work.
Right, and for me personally, it's always about what her wishes are, or said person's.
And that's the way it should be.
And no matter how much you love them, and actually it should be because of how much you love them that you respect what that person desires and wishes for their final steps,
right?
Or any transition or any decisions and things like that.
Because you don't have to.
Yeah. You
don't have to honor her decisions. The whole healthcare proxy is essentially you're just naming somebody to make your medical decisions for you.
Yeah.
Now, in Massachusetts, we have another document. So when a client comes in and we do an estate plan for them, far as their medical documents, we do the healthcare proxy. We do a living will, even though a living will is not a legal document in Massachusetts. It's just essentially a document that gives your healthcare proxy more information to work with if they have to make a medical decision on your behalf. But ultimately, the person you name as your healthcare proxy do not have to follow your wishes. That's why it's so important you pick somebody you trust that is going to follow your wishes to the letter of the law.
Absolutely.
Same thing with your power of attorney. Okay, you're just simply electing somebody to make your financial decisions for you. Now, there are different types of power of attorneys, of course, but the main durable power of attorney, that's the main docket, the most common document that we do here in my practice. Basically, you're giving somebody to make your medical decisions for you after you become incapacitated. Simple as that. Yeah. But it's so important you pick somebody you trust because they don't have to follow your wishes.
And that's scary when they don't. It is scary when they don't.
Right.
And I put for a note here, the pre-planning, I put my family fell into that. Would you consider what we did pre-planning? Yes. So basically just being proactive, getting ahead of the game, because a friend of mine had mentioned, no, I'm sorry, not a friend of mine, a family member. It was kind of in one of those group conversations. It was a bunch of us together, and they were talking about how I think the house wasn't in a trust, and they weren't sure because there were some medical decisions that needed to be made, and I think some of this hadn't been put together yet. And so it made me really start thinking. I said, maybe we should look into, how everything is. And then we forgot about it, and a couple of years had passed.
Of course.
And then another friend of mine had a loss in the family, and kind of a similar situation. They weren't sure. And then I said, you know what? And Mom and I talked about it. We talked with Michael, my brother, and then we just decided to say, you know what? Let's just find out where we're at.
Right.
And I am so happy that we did.
Yeah. Nobody wants to think about their mortality.
No, nobody does. I don't no, definitely not.
And nobody wants to think about putting together whether incapacity documents or after death documents. Nobody wants to think about that, but unfortunately, sometimes we have to, especially when the first major life change circumstance I say is when you become a parent yourself. You have to think about those things if you're any good of a parent. Addressing those and making sure you have documents in place like that.
And I think that's one of the first things, like you said, you should think about as a parent, because it's not just about you anymore at this point. It's them. It's the kids. It's about them. Yeah.
And you want to make sure that you're picking the right person to raise your kids if God forbid it gets to a point where a decision like that needs to be raised or decided, excuse me. And also too their money that they're going to get. You don't want them just getting it all at age 18 and going crazy.
And it's when you mentioned it's not fun talking about this kind of thing, and it definitely isn't. But we're also, my family and I, we're also a bunch of jokers, and we're full of sarcasm, and we make light of it. And I'm always making jokes here and there. And I think it was actually after one of our Zoom meetings last year, and I remember this clear as day because we had 5 years, Ma, 5 years, right? And so my brother was leaving. And I'm really not making light of this discussion because I find it very, very, very vital to everybody. But it was just funny because my mom was standing kind of next to the driver's side of the car, facing him, and he was going to get into the car. And then I think something had fallen out of her pocket, and she went to bend over and get it. My brother started opening the door. I'm like, hold on a second, Ma. Back away from the door. Yeah. We have 5 years to do. We need 5 years. And we all just kind of laughed because it was...
I told a client of mine last week that we need to wrap her in bubble wrap. Keep her safe for 5 years.
Yeah, no bruises. Does not hurt each other.
And then it's nice to brought a little levity to the...
I love bubble wrap.
Yeah, it brought a little... So does my sons. Yeah. But it brought a little levity to the conversation because, it is tough to talk about.
Yeah. But you have to understand... people should understand that it is... it's life.
Yeah.
And it's unavoidable.
Listen, I could leave this podcast and go across the street here and be it. The car hits me. So
let's not say that.
Let's not say that.
We're going to neutralize that. But you're right. You're right. I could trip on my way to the car after this podcast.
You never know.
You really, really don't. Yeah. And so it's nice to have all of these things put in place. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I actually didn't even go over your background, but what made you really want to, when you started your law adventure, what made you go in this direction? Was it something that triggered it, or did you have other plans when you decided to become an attorney?
So my path to being an attorney is a bit different from the norm.
Oh, do tell.
Yes. So I started my career with the Sheriff's Department. I worked at I worked for the Essex County Sheriff's Department. I worked at the prison in Middleton, Massachusetts.
Okay. Yeah, I know that.
So when I graduated from my undergrad at Endicott College in Beverly, my major was criminal justice. So I wanted to be a police officer.
Oh, okay.
So there was an opportunity for a correctional officer position in 1997, and I applied and fortunate enough, got the position and was hired by the Essex County Sheriff's Department as a correctional officer. While I was there, I was fortunate enough to move up the ranks. I was a sergeant, lieutenant, captain,
Wow.
and I ended up retiring as an assistant superintendent. While I was a captain, I was in charge of a community outreach program called Triad. Triad is a national program that was created. Triad is not an acronym for anything. It's just a senior outreach program where seniors, law enforcement, and senior service providers working together to provide safety and awareness programs for seniors.
Oh, okay.
So my sheriff at the time, he started the program, adopted the program in Essex County, and he moved me into that position where I was the director of the Triad program, where I would go. I was outside of the jail,
Yep.
which was fine by me.
That must have been an interesting
It was nice
experience.
And so every month I would go to each senior center in Essex County, and we would have meetings with the local police department, with the council on aging directors and local seniors, and we would come up with things that we could do, events that we could do, based upon senior safety and awareness. So, for example, at that time I had just started law school, so I started doing a lot of legal talks. One of the most common, the importance of having a power of attorney in a healthcare proxy. I would do identity theft talks. So we do events.
That's a big one.
Yeah, we do events.
Okay.
And it was all tailored towards senior safety. So that's when I started working with seniors, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed interacting with them, hearing the stories of them growing up, and
if you do sit down with, like you said, some of the seniors, it's a wealth of information.
It reminded me of my grandparents, and one in particular, my grandfather, because out of high school I almost went into the Navy, and if it wasn't, I had a few circumstances that changed that path, but I almost went to the Navy, and it was because of my grandfather. My grandfather was in the Navy. He was in World War II. He was in Pearl Harbor. He was on, I can't remember what the name of his ship, but his ship was sunk. It wasn't the Arizona. He had to swim ashore. And I remember growing up as a kid. Now, my grandfather, this is my mom's dad. He died when I was 9. Oh. But I still remember watching the old war movies with him and sitting there. And he would tell me the stories, and I was fascinated. And I just loved it. So it reminded me of my grandfather and my other grandfather and grandmothers as well.
Yeah.
Them telling me the stories. Like I remember my dad's father telling me, stories about when he bought his first house, that his mortgage was $25 a month.
Oh my God.
In Amesbury here. And it was a big event. Like he would go down to the bank, he'd put a suit on and go down to the bank, and he would pay his mortgage. And it was, like I said, it was a big event to do that. And so I love the story. So it reminded me of just interaction with my grandparents.
Yeah.
And I just really loved working with seniors. So at that time, like I said, I was in law school, graduated from law school, was practicing part-time. I was doing estate planning, and how I got into estate planning was I had to pick an area of law that didn't really require me to go to court very often, because I was still working during the day for the Sheriff's Department. So so after work I would go, I had a home office at the time, and I would have a couple of clients a month, and I wasn't doing anything major, but I had a virtual office in North Andover where I live. And so I was doing that until I retired, and then when I retired in 2018, there was a spot opened up here in downtown Amesbury where I grew up, and I said I wanted to open up the practice full time. So that's when I did, and so I was doing estate planning, and at that time I added elder law to the practice, and that's where I became, I joined Elder Council. It's a national group of elder law attorneys, which they have been unbelievable. And since then, I've been doing elder law.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's like you said, it's funny how you kind of started somewhere completely different, and then you ended up here.
Right.
And I'm thankful for that, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't know you. We wouldn't be doing this podcast. You wouldn't have helped my family get everything together. And then like I said, it's been an amazing experience with you because I never knew any of this. And I mean, I still barely know anything.
I'm
really.
still learning every day.
But I'm really glad that we were able to sit down today and talk about this. And I'm glad we were able to go over some of your background as well, because, you know, it's nice to know where you come from, and like because you have stories to tell, and like you
Sure.
said, and I think again the elder law and the estate planning is a great area to be because, well, everybody gets older.
Yeah. And
there's no lack of seniors. There's no lack of people getting older and becoming seniors. You know,
Right.
it's kind of like the trades. You know, you're always going to need plumbers and you're always going to need electricians. So this is a huge area to be focused in. And I
That's
think
right.
I'm thankful for you for helping us
Thank
the
you.
way you did. So I'm going to wrap it up, but I want to let everybody out there know you can find Jason in downtown Amesbury, 110 Main Street in Amesbury.
Correct.
You can also find him on www. And it's Ebacher Law, and that's E-B as in boy, ACHERLAW.com. Or you could give him a call, 978-269-4485, or we can email you at jebacher@ebacher.com. I'm sorry, ebacherlaw.com.
Correct.
And maybe we could do another episode down the road. Maybe we'll just do
Love
a
to.
fun one outside of law, and you know, maybe I'll bring some snacks.
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
So thank you out there for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be seeing you on the Lily Pad.